Hello, welcome to this semester's first episode of Cult Confessionals. We are very happy to be back, and today I am joined by...
Robert Spahr.
Rob is the Director of Media Arts here at SIU, Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. And today we'll just be chatting all about Rob, see what you're up to. So I guess the first kind of headliner question is, what would you describe your role as director for media arts at SIU?
Oh, sure. I'm a faculty member in the School of Media Arts. For those that don't know, the School of Media Arts has two programs. During the reorg of SIU, we combined both the Department of Cinema and the Department of Radio, Television, and Digital Media to form the school. And as the director, basically I help lead the faculty and help facilitate and work with the faculty to get them what they need, ideally, and to support and guide the development of the curriculum. That primarily is what the faculty is primary purpose within the administration of the university, is the faculty kind of control that. And so we've been developing and working on in the last 2 years, focusing on our foundation courses. We also have, besides those 2 degrees, we have the Master of Fine Arts in Media Arts is also within the school. So my role as a faculty member, and then to help administer the school.
Amidst that kind of like restructuring that happened, what would you say that the new structure brought with media arts has been?
That's a great question, because in addition to forming the School of Media Arts, that coincided with the creation of the new College of Arts and Media, which is really exciting. Many faculty for quite many years have been working towards developing what became the College of Arts and Media, we call CAM. And the promise of CAM, the interdisciplinarity between the 6 schools, architecture, art and design, music, theater and dance, journalism and advertising in the School of Media Arts, and the School of Music, all make up the college. And so not only the interdisciplinarity between cinema and radio, television, and all of those kinds of media, but there is the promise and the aspiration of working towards the interdisciplinarity between all the schools.
So you're creating this kind of separate but merged sort of system that you're...
Right. I mean, I think the idea is, the hope is eventually students would not only study within each of their schools, but have the opportunity, if they so desire, to work on either co-taught or just take classes at other schools and really merge all of this kind of creative activity.
I personally think it's a very interesting concept of new learning, because of course art is not just planar like engineering. You can go, okay, we need these certain things so you know how to hold yourself in the world, but I mean,
right,
it's so modular.
And I think, right, I think as you're saying, is there's overlap, right, between different disciplines, and then there are things that are unique to them, and that's what's really exciting, is to kind of find where there are boundaries and where there's overlap.
Moving into just kind of your direct relation into it, what are the kinds of things that you personally work on while just the semester goes on, or the entire year?
Well, I'm really excited. I'll talk about the teaching component, because I do teach at least one class. This semester I'm teaching 2, but in the foundations program for the last 3 years, working with amazing faculty in the School of Media Arts, and the ability to co-teach that we've been able to do, to kind of develop an idea of how do you teach art and media, film, audio arts in 2023. How can we innovate and develop new methods of teaching these kinds of subject matter? And I view it as a creative activity, just like my own work, and to co-teach with really amazing colleagues, and to develop and innovate new assignments or new ways of looking and listening to media.
I think it's great. I always say that. But personally, from my experience of being in the program so far, I think that the approach of the acceptance of how media is changing and how it can always change, and the foundations that are being brought to the table are important in the ways that they structure you to be ready for this change. Could you build on what the foundations are teaching the current students?
Absolutely. That you raise a really good point. Given our kind of legacy names of cinema and radio and television and everything in between, and we teach screenwriting and animation and game design and installation and other kinds of expanded media, but those legacy names, what is television and what is radio, what is film in the age of Netflix and streaming. And so the answer, I think, that many of us came to, and this was during the pandemic, is what can we teach to prepare students for a future 40, 50 years from now that we can't envision? And I feel really confident that what we settled upon basically is sort of how we assess whether the classes are successful or not through assessment tools, helping you develop your creative practice, your creative process, critical thinking, communication skills, whether you're telling your own story, writing your own stories, or telling the stories of others, and collaboration. So those four kind of buckets, I think, would lead students into a future that if you're adaptable and are always learning, those will be skills that you can carry forward. So the kinds of specific things students learn in the foundation sequence is everything from photography and actual drawing and 2D design. We have students working on visual storytelling, performance, 3D design. In the spring, they work on AR, other performance modules, sound all the time, whether it's sound design or sound as its own medium. And then a very large project at the end of the second semester where students really are hopefully either exploring a new medium, a new area of study that they didn't plan on majoring in, or they build upon and develop relationships with one another to work collaboratively on bigger projects.
I think you also bring another interesting point of the structuring from foundations of building habits and creative processes are important. I know you're very big on the proponent of adding a journal into any artist's life. I personally have picked up on that from you. But what would you say that those tools of the creative process entirely add?
Well, I think even before I even got into the tools where you mentioned journaling, which I find really useful, and the idea of an analog journal to slow down and to write. Something we're trying this semester in the class that I'm teaching is what I'm calling slow reading, where we do readings in class. There might only be a couple of pages, different kind of subject matter, and then we have discussions and we journal and we take time and slow down, a little mindful sort of meditation at the beginning. We read, we journal, we discuss before we then go on to make and do. And I think that slowing down and being self-reflective a little bit is really useful to sort of change the energy of the room. I think the big umbrella idea is what the whole sequence is. I think if it was really successful, the goal would be to get students to think of themselves as building a way of being, that their creative practice is a way of being in the world. It isn't just making a project or doing one particular medium, but that everything they're learning in college through their peers, their faculty, the RSOs, is working towards building that way of being in the world.
And bringing together from the way of being and also just your personal use of the journal, I am wondering what kind of projects or art you're currently making just in your own time.
It's funny, right now I keep coming back to John Milton's Paradise Lost. I've done over many years work dealing with that as a subject matter. And I'm currently, for those who don't know anything about my work, I do everything from traditional kind of media, charcoal and paint on paper, usually with a digital origin. And I have for, actually it's 20 years this summer, which is crazy to say out loud, have been working since 2003. I have been coding simple computer code that scrapes the web for content, whether it's originally news sites and then later social media sites, for either text, images, or sound. And then this automated computer code that runs on a server 24/7, scrapes this content as source material, and produces basically digital collage. It'll output a video, or it'll output a text file, like sort of this poetry text, or a sound, or still image. And I started doing that. I have a very traditional sort of fine art background, and I started doing this computer automated code as my interest in what, much like early performance that follows a script, or if you were to do a production of Shakespeare's Macbeth, the script that Shakespeare wrote is kind of the computer code for me. And then you might do one production of Macbeth, I might do another. So this code runs, and I have one particular one, the very first one, has been running every hour on the hour since 2003. And so it produces, my interest then was, and it still is, the internet as a medium, the sense of overload that has only gotten more so in the last 20 years, but I felt it in 2003, the sense of this overload of images and sounds and the stream of information. So the metaphor is like my code is running on the server, and then on this particular one, every hour it reaches out into the internet, follows my instructions, pulls images from certain sites and combines them in a certain way and produces an image. I don't know how many thousands of images that would be in 20 years every hour. I haven't seen them all. The idea that I have several terabytes of artwork that I haven't even seen also produces a sense of overload. Just backing up the work becomes kind of an overload burden. There's something interesting about the idea that, for me, what is the role of the artist and what is the role of art in this sense of this digital moment of overload? And that's why the slower, more analog-based charcoal drawing, slower in the sense of process and drawing over time, is sort of my alternate mode to the overload. So it's this digital analog struggle, just like you mentioning the journal. For years I tried to do journaling digitally, and I have settled on analog as this taking a chunk of stone of graphite and dragging it across paper. There's something, the materiality of that as a comparison to working in code.
I think that comparison is very interesting because from your program's called Cruft.
Right. That's what I call that body of work of automated images and collage. Cruft is a slang derogatory term for computer code that is bloated. It's almost like an appendix. It has no purpose anymore, and it just gets in the way, and it kind of is bloat. So if you have a crufty piece of software, you would consider that poorly written.
But the contrast between Cruft and that it's been running for so long, it's automated, and it's created this overload of bloat that is now, in a way, similar to the medium that it's scraping content from, in comparison to the more intentional charcoal and analog pieces like in the journal, where you have to really think about it moment to moment, but Cruft just works.
Right. You point to the irony that it has become its own Cruft, right? Like it's taken the digital leftovers of the news cycle, and over the time that it's been running, it produces equal amount of bloat, equal amount of digital stuff. And what's interesting for me as an artist is some of them meet kind of a modernist aesthetic of like, wow, that's a great image. I really love that, and I sometimes will print them out, or I'll save them and show them in a curated kind of way. And then others produce images that maybe are not as interesting to look at, but yet for me it still operates as an important conceptual idea that that's what was happening at that moment.
I think it's a very interesting concept, and, well, concept in the way that it's always creating its own idea. Do you think that the average person, you just mentioned the overload of content and then it brings and the basis of what Cruft is about, do you think the average person is fully affected by just the overload of media that's now in day-to-day life?
I think everyone is experiencing it if they're online. I guess the question is, how is everyone dealing with it, right? And I think the piece that I'm currently working on right now, and again, I mentioned I've keep coming back to certain themes, and one of them is John Milton's Paradise Lost, and this idea that there's this epic poem of the expulsion from paradise, and then that the hero is really the serpent. For me personally, is an interesting metaphor for the way the world feels right now, and in its divisiveness. And one of the results of the overload that I wouldn't have predicted 20 years ago is how much truth is drowned out by all of the overload. So that if everybody is saying everything, one of the results of the internet and the web, which 20 years ago I loved so much, but it has not turned out the way I would have wanted. So for me as an artist, I'm interested in the internet as a medium and what its strengths are, what its weaknesses are. When you mix that with capitalism, one of the weaknesses is that everybody's equal on the web, which is the great democratic, hopeful idea that I had 20-some years ago. But the result today in 2023 is everything is drowned out. We can't determine what's true, what's not easily. Most people can't. It's very difficult to have that kind of media literacy when everyone's shouting in that overload. And so that tension between what the internet promises, what it could do, it can be a resistance to power. It could allow people to communicate at great distances at the speed of light. It allows us to protest and organize. And at the same time, it allows 4 or 5 corporations to control everything we're talking about.
You have a very, I don't want to say set as in the way that it's like locked in forever and never to be touched again, but set in the way that you have your direct ideas and in a scholarly sense of just what you make and what you're aware of. Could you fill in a little about how you got to that point of just your general creation?
Right. So it's funny that you think that it's set like that, because I don't feel like that at all.
Really?
I feel like I'm always embracing uncertainty, which I think as an artist, I hope that I'm always approaching that. Every time I become certain, I would hope that I keep pushing my own boundaries to try to get into that uncomfortable, uncertain place. I mean, that's what makes it fun. What else? Remind me your question now, in the sense of the larger...
In your journey of being an artist.
My own journey, you're right. Well, my own journey is actually, it's easy to try to make sense of it in hindsight, but at the time that I was doing it or moving through it, in the same way I can't predict my own future, it sounds more linear than it really was. So my own background is I studied fine art as an undergrad. I focused on sculpture, but I studied fine art broadly, lots of drawing, lots of figure drawing, printmaking, and sculpture. The art school that I went to was in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I'm from, and in that art school at the time, the sculpture department was where they put everything. They didn't know where to put it in any clean category like painting or drawing. So performance, and there was even a class in Super 8 filmmaking, and all that is lumped in the sculpture department. And then I went to grad school in New York City in Parsons School of Design and the sculpture department. And in between undergrad and grad, I had won this traveling scholarship. So I traveled throughout Europe for that year in between, which was very life-altering. Focused on Italy, Greece, Germany, a little bit of Northern Europe. And moved to New York City. Studied sculpture with some really great and amazing faculty and wanted to stay in New York. And hung around a bunch of actors, had a day job at this scholarly bookstore, which was fantastic. It was like another whole education. And hanging around a bunch of actors, I started this small gallery in their lobby of their theater, because they had an audience coming in every day. And it was, and you may have heard this story in class, because this is like one really important moment. I was reading a film essay book during the gallery hours. I'm sitting in the gallery, open hours on a Saturday, hopefully people are going to come, and I'm reading this book, and I pick up and I read Walter Benjamin's Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. I read the article, my head explodes, I close the book, I tell all my friends I'm not going to make sculpture anymore, after I just graduated from grad school. it was all hyperbole because I still make stuff. But
Yeah.
for me, that essay triggered what I always knew was possible, but that essay gave me permission to include smells in my sculpture, to include sounds in my sculpture, to include activities like performance and motion and movement and dance, so that what was process-based sculpture became performance. And through the act of performance, I would make stuff that would sort of sit there as residue of the performance. Everything from a weather radio playing to the smells of different, I don't know, one performance had a stick of butter burning in a metal skillet, and then it would sit and rot for the month during the time it was in the exhibit. So this transformation of this material over time. So time clearly became one of my mediums that I hadn't considered in great detail. And what I'm describing ultimately is sort of the proto-cruft.
Yeah.
Everything in those performances are now happening on a server over time, giving up a certain amount of control, and the server's producing this work using collage, assemblage, montage. It's all fragments. It's collecting fragments from our existence and recombining them in some way. And collage is so important to me. I mean, it's the main, I would argue, way of working of the 20th century, 21st century. Whether you assemble, montage, or collage, you're connecting fragments.
Yeah.
And that's how we live our life. We think it's one continuous experience, but it's constant fragments.
Experience of others that are...
Right, or through your eyes, through your senses, having a dream, listening to something on the radio, hearing somebody walk down the hall. These are all these fragments, sensory fragments as well. So that, I think, described, and then from my sort of theater performance days, I did start a theater. We did all kinds of experimental Shakespeare outside in this parking lot. That was really useful to get the New York Times to come down and review us. We had a writers group. Would write a lot of original plays. We turned those into films, put them on the web. I'll speed up a little bit because I'm old. So then I jumped on the whole sort of web.com era in New York. I got a full-time job doing web design, web development, which paid me way more than I was worth. But it gave me the technical skills in order to then develop the craft. So I then combined that sort of art background, theater background with the technology. And then about 2009, I came to SIU in Carbondale. So
Now we're here.
And now I'm here, talking to you.
Do you believe that you would use craft in a direct way further, or do you believe it's more of just the continuous conceptual idea that's always in motion?
Well, I have, over the years, the last 10 years or so, incorporated live performance with the code, producing images. So I would do live performance with projected images and playing sounds that are being created in real time. So I think of those as collaborative performances with the internet as a participant following my rules, but things that I wouldn't necessarily know is going to be the result of the internet at that moment. And then lately, this past spring, I did something for the first time where I combined the code producing craft while incorporating drawing and painting in that performance. So this past spring, and I haven't followed up with that yet, I'm still kind of letting that digest and think about that idea a little bit. But the idea of combining this slower drawing with this faster overload kind of is a collision of the two different practices.
I believe that craft is very interesting myself. I have been thinking about it recently, just on my own time.
Yeah.
Because I've worked with you before on a project that used some of the same fundamentals in collage.
You were talking about your coding and producing image and...
Yeah. And that was a lot more simple. It didn't really scrape from the internet, just a catalog that I created.
But you did incorporate chance.
Yes.
So that one of the ideas, I'm remembering now, one of the ideas that piece that you made that we have in common is the idea that this object, this media object, is not stationary.
Yeah.
if I remember right, every time the viewer would come to your web page with your artwork, it was different.
Yes.
There were different states. That's a really important idea for me, and I remember appreciating you exploring that rather than making a film that's set.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first shot, this is the second shot, this is the second scene, this is the third scene, and this is the ending.
Mm-hmm.
Your work was more of a loop or a spiral rather than a line with a beginning and an end. And that's a different way to explore the world, right? And to make work that is either permanent or ephemeral, or is the same for every viewer or different for every viewer, is a very different way to kind of situate yourself in the world.
Oh, well, that idea of setting boundaries for something that goes on its own to collect data and then reproduce something is like the fundamental that springs from both, but in just different faculties. And in a way I believe is a basis of what teaching is.
Yeah.
And
it's the basis of living, too. So you as an artist, whatever you produce today or tomorrow is the result of your entire life's experience. Even though it may have only taken you an hour to make that, it's your whole life is in there. And to me, that's a little bit what some of this art is sort of thinking about and deals with.
So we are running down our clock, sadly.
Okay.
So since this is more of a professional spotlight, is there anything that you would like to directly to say to any students that are newcoming or just anyone that's interested in media arts in general?
I think I am very grateful to be here. I think what the faculty that I am fortunate enough to work with and the students in the School of Media Arts, there's something really special happening. Not just in the classes that we offer, but the cohort and in the collaboration that I see, and compared to other schools that I've taught at. So I'm just grateful to be here, and I would suggest everyone to come here and check it out because I think it's unique.
Yeah.
It's a really amazing time. The world is very divisive, but what's happening in the School of Media Arts and with media and the industry converging, I think the School of Media Arts is capitalizing on that moment, and there's something really special here. And I'm not just happy to be here, but I would encourage other people to come and experience it because it's pretty cool. It's pretty nice. I'm just glad to be a part of it.
So now to keep up our tradition, this is Cult Confessionals after all. So Rob, I do ask you for one confession to leave us off with.
Let's see. There's so many. I love, even though I don't necessarily go around saying it often, 1970s detective television shows. Give me a good episode of Columbo.
Yeah.
Rockford Files. If anyone hasn't seen them, go check them out. The very first Columbo, I think, was directed by Steven Spielberg, the first pilot.
Was it?
The very young Steven Spielberg. But I love that sort of 70s detective. The Rockford Files is great.
Is it based off of just the vibe or the time period?
Yeah, it's kind of like the sort of, well, the Rockford Files is interesting because it's kind of like the 30s boiled, film noir, but instead of like his secretary, he has an answering machine, which is high tech in 1970. I don't know. There's something about just that sort of episodic television where the detective comes in and solves the problem and fixes it. It's a secret pleasure of mine that I just like to relax and watch those kind of shows. So, yeah.
All right. Well, Rob, thank you very much for joining us for the first Cult Confessional of this current season.
Well, thanks, Sloane. It's been a pleasure.
So thank you everyone else for tuning in to Cult Confessionals this week. We will be resuming our schedule of producing our show every other week. So be on the lookout. Thank you everyone again for tuning in. Love you, mean it, bye.